Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vaga Marani, and here at the Halifax International Security Forum in Nova Scotia, Canada, one of the world's truly great security conferences. Our coverage here is sponsored by Boeing and Leonardo DRS, and it's my honor to be talking to Dr. Joe Joffe, who is the editor of the Zeit, also a professor at Stanford University. Joe, it's always a pleasure seeing you at these conferences, and it's the 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and I wanted to talk to you about where you were and start there and then build up what we've accomplished and what more work has to be done.
Well, as a kid, I woke up on one August Sunday morning, and there were these tanks assembling on either side of the Brandenburg Gate, and that's how it went from 61 to 89. And the first point I want to make is I never thought that wall would ever come down. And so did most analysts, by the way, because we couldn't imagine that the Soviet Union would give up the westernmost brace of its empire. And then it suddenly happened. And that was a miracle that with all my intelligence and education, I could not foresee.
And everybody remembers where they were when the wall fell. Where were you and what were you doing? Because you were already a very prominent reporter.
Yes, I was in Paris running a taped session for the BBC.
And what was that? There was a lot of jubilation at the time. There was some trepidation on the part of Germany about what was going to happen with the costs associated with bringing the East and reintegrating it with the West. How has everything worked in your estimation? Because ADF is popular, the right-wing German group is popular in some parts of the former East. Talk to us about what things have gone well and what things have gone maybe less well.
Well, first of all, after reunification in 1990, the government imposed a 4% surcharge on income tax, which we never stopped paying year after year. And so that money went into 4% of the world's fourth largest GDP. It's a lot of money. And so that world went into reconstructing a world which we, so to speak, had destroyed. Not intentionally, but when East Germany collapsed into the West, its economy became totally uncompetitive. Its industries became uncompetitive. Everything that it sold on a barter basis within the Eastern Bloc and so on was suddenly gone. So that infusion of money year after year was necessary. What have we gotten for it? We probably have a more modern infrastructure in Eastern Germany than in Western Germany, like a fiberglass internet. The economy has almost come up to par. Wages are almost at par. Social Security payments are almost up to par. So in that respect, we did well. Now the downside. Paradoxically, one reason why the Kohl government wanted your reunification quickly is to stop the outflow of people coming in from the east to the west by, building prosperity there. It so happened that net migration continues. Eastern Germany is still emptying out with people leaving a largely rural country for the flesh pots of the West, so to speak. Second problem, you just mentioned it. The weirdest thing is that the rise of the far right, called the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, in various East German states. It's a federal construction. And the weirdest thing of it all is that this anti-refugee party is scoring best in those places that has the smallest number of refugees. So the reunification has discombobulated the party system. It used to be ultra stable, and now it has kind of frazzled out to the far right and the far left.
What is Germany has done an incredible job since the war of trying to fight the right as a general rule. What are the keys, do you think, to fight this movement that is gaining traction in the United States, in France, in countries all across Europe. Britain, Netherlands had that with Geert Wilders. Scandinavia has seen this. What's the right way to fight this?
I don't know what the right way is, but I'll tell you what the wrong way is. You just correctly noted that we are not talking about a peculiar German way, and it reminds you of the old ways, but Germany is, so to speak, in the mainstream with all these countries that you've mentioned. What is the common denominator? I think it's not the deplorables, those who supposedly have their jobs threatened or lost by globalization, all that stuff, nor are they the uneducated, because on average, these voters are slightly above average in terms of education and income compared to the rest. I think the problem is identity politics. Identity politics. I mean, these people are worried about losing their Germanness or Americanness or Dutchness. They resent influx of foreigners who they think do not assimilate far enough, who, to use a European term, are building parallel cultures, parallel societies. And so I would call it identity politics in an age where the so-called elites seem to be paying more attention to our minorities, be they gender minorities, racial minorities, skin color minorities, than to us, so to speak, the hoi polloi.
And so what's the way to fight it, right? I mean, if you look at this sort of strain that's developed, is it a messaging issue? Is it an investment issue? Is it an education issue? Is it all of the above? What are the ways that democracies can maintain the foundations of their democratic ideal and character?
What I know, it's not an unemployment issue. I mean, Germany has full employment. The United States has over full employment. Britain has full employment. And yet the Brits, which is truly bizarre, are resentful not of Muslims, dark-skinned Muslims, but good Christian folks, white Christian folks like Poles and Bulgarians, without whom the British economy, certainly the plumbing system in London, would collapse. So it's not an economic issue. I think these people want to be taken seriously. They want their identity being affirmed, as opposed over partial identities. And to me, that explains Trump's enormous success. He is the voice of the so-called downtrodden, those who have been forgotten and despised by the elites, quote unquote.
Well, there was another figure who would always talk about the forgotten people, and he ended up causing kind of big headaches.
Forgotten man is a term, I think, of Roosevelt in the Great Depression.
That's true. I was thinking about another shorter German guy who would also use similar language.
We must not use that analogy. When Hitler came to power, unemployment in Germany was like 10-20%. There was real poverty. There was no generous welfare state. All of these cushions, so to speak, that guard against these dislocations are now in place. They weren't in place then, which explains to me, and that's a good part. In the year of the last free elections in Germany, just pre-Nazi, 1932, when Roosevelt was elected in the States, Nazis and communists garnered more than 50% of the votes and the seats in the Reichstag. When you look at Europe, start with Germany, AfD, 14%, 15%, which means the other 85% are democratic parties. And the same holds true in France and in Holland and in Belgium and even in Italy, where recently the far right was kicked out of government. So that's the good part.
Okay, let me ask you one question about information and disinformation. You have a reputation for being a fair but very, very tough reporter. How do you see the advent of social media channels that have made all sorts of disinformation and propaganda, where you are putting the craziest person, as Sacha Baron Cohen in his speech, and I'm repeating this because it's such an extraordinary speech he made at the Anti-Defamation League a little while ago. I commend anybody to go to YouTube and to watch it, where he takes on the social media companies that say these guys are enablers of the kind of propaganda that propounds the worst kind of hatred and racism. And to position it as it's an equal of Zeit or BBC or anybody else. What is the right way to fight disinformation like that?
I would be, having spent so many years in the United States and having genuflected before the First Amendment, which is a great amendment, by the way, I hesitate enormously to impose any kind of censorship because, today we are censoring the bad guys, and maybe tomorrow they'll be censoring good guys like me. That's a very slippery road. But I would like to make, like Harry Truman, if I don't know the facts, I will assert the principle. The internet, which we celebrated as a great liberalizing, democratizing force, is actually more advantageous at this point to the authoritarians and totalitarians. I mean, the Gestapo and the NKVD couldn't have dreamt of having that kind of surveillance and that kind of propaganda instrument at their disposal that the Chinese have, that the Russians have. The Russians had to work very hard at subverting the West, and they were not very effective. But today, with TV stations like Russia Today or Sputnik, which serves the purpose of the Russian government, they have a heyday in manipulating public opinion, whether in the United States or in Europe. And I do not have a real good answer, but maybe we should use the good old principle of deterrence and do unto them what they're doing unto us. If we could.
Let me ask one last question, though. When it comes to free speech, journalistic organizations abide by rules, double-checking, equal time, putting principles in place, being subject to libel suits. Do you think that it's fair, and I think that's one of the points that Baron Cohen makes in his addresses, that I have free speech in my movies, but there are things that I can and can't do and can't say. Shouldn't these organizations, these large organizations, abide by some form of standards and moderating to make sure that hate speech is stripped away that can hide under the guise? Because what did Hitler do? Use the rules, the free rules of the Weimar State to destroy the Weimar State.
Well, it had some allies in addition to that. Look, in the newspaper business, all of us, whether we live in First Amendment America or in Germany or in Britain, we have to abide by the rules. And if we don't, we can get hit by lawsuits and by tough and stringent penalties. So we often take certain manuscripts and show them to our lawyers before we print them. Ideally, that's what Zuckerberg ought to do too. What I haven't figured out yet is how to do this with 2 billion subscribers, so to speak. My paper only has 500,000 subscribers. But in principle, I think we should impose the same kind of responsibility and liabilities on the, so to speak, the editors of Instagram and Facebook, as the government justly imposes on us. We do not have unlimited leeway to insult and to spread hate and to insult and destroy, commit character assassination. That's what's happening in the net. And but I think we've begun to worry about this and to experiment how to get the bad stuff out without killing the good stuff.
Dr. Joe Joffe, editor of Die Zeit and also at Stanford University. It's always a pleasure, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Until we meet again next year.
Gespannt wie ein Flitzebogen.
Hey, that's pretty good.